Welcome, I am JW the DM, and today we're doing the final part of my three-part series, Player Engagement Through Character Backstories. Today is about checking in with your players about those backstories and how they've been used and about how those changes may inform the future of your campaign. As for those last two videos, you can find them at these links here, and they're also linked in the description below. Once the player, with input from you, has created that backstory, video 1, and then you've peppered that backstory and its influences into various encounters, video 2, you can't just leave it there, especially as things change for the character. Remember, when things change for the character, things change for the player as well. And when that happens, you'll want to check in with that player and see how they feel about the direction their character is going in, and if a change is needed, brainstorm a few ideas with the player to come up with possible ways that things might go, assuming the character survives long enough. Remember, this needs to be collaborative. The player needs to be satisfied with what's going on, and you have to be satisfied with how well it fits into your world. By the way, that doesn't mean spoilers and railroading. I'll get to that in a bit, but first, we'll stick with the check-in part. There are 2 times for checking in. One is simply every so many sessions. How many will be up to you and your players, possibly even player by player. The other time is, as I went over before, when the character has something decently profound change in the state of their personal story. You might see the player begin struggling with roleplay after that, or maybe they disconnect a little bit, or maybe the opposite happens and they seem ecstatic. But even if the player seems neutral or like they fully expected that change and aren't hugely moved, check in on them. Find some time between sessions and have a chat. And if you can't talk directly, type away on Discord or text each other. And just to emphasize it, you'll still want to check in every so many sessions, even if nothing big has happened in that character's story. You'll see why in a moment. Here's what you'll be trying to find out. Has the player's view of their character changed? I've had players decide that the character wasn't who they thought they'd be. I know that sounds a little silly, but sometimes a player wants to retroactively change something about their character's past or wants to adjust their personality. Maybe they're simply no longer happy with their personal story and need to work with you to steer it in another direction. So ask the player if their view of their character has changed and, as much as you can without creating too many potential spoilers, discuss a few options for a couple of things that could, and I emphasize could, happen in the future. Then, to the best of your ability, try to make those adjustments to how the story will now interact with the character. What encounters they might have, and a few ways for how some of them might resolve. To do that, well, return to the last video on spotlighting. Another thing to find out is the character still pursuing the same goals? Goals may change for multiple reasons, not least of which is achieving a goal. That's usually the main reason for changing goals, but not always. Sometimes if the player's views about their character have changed and you guys make adjustments, this may mean that the character's goals are now different. Changes to the character's backstory often, if not usually, change what kinds of things the character is pursuing. So once again, ask the player what those goals may be now, and adjust accordingly. Also, goals may change simply through actions within the game. It could be that some insurmountable obstacle now makes achieving that goal impossible, which, as a DM, we should very rarely, if ever, make goals completely impossible. Or maybe something happens to the character that makes them have a change of heart, like they saved a puppy and decided that maybe becoming a ruthless warlord might not be for them. Once again, see what your player says are now the character's goals and try to place encounters into your game from time to time that advance those goals. Of course, those encounters have to make sense. It's very rare for someone to receive a letter from their mom while they're 3 levels deep in a horrifying dungeon. Whether or not the goals have changed or the player's view of their character has changed, See if you or the player has anything new and fun to try in the backstory or to prepare for a future spotlight moment. Sometimes this happens organically in-game, and sometimes you need to ask about it specifically out of game. Either way, work in what you can. As an aside, my favorite in-game moment of this was, and I'm sure I'm remembering the circumstances wrong, when an important NPC was questioning a PC about his involvement in something or other, and the PC said it was his brother. Immediately, one of the other players at the table asked, "He's got a brother?" And the player and I simultaneously replied, "He does now." Love that moment. Anyway, speaking of moments, now is the moment I tell you about working with players on the future of their characters without spoiling too much. It's okay to get a little meta here. You can say something like, maybe your god will send you and the party on a quest for a special weapon or something. You never said what the weapon was, where it is, what obstacles there would be, or if it was even for sure going to happen. You never stated what the circumstances would be about how the quest will likely be given. Hell, you probably don't even know yourself. You can mention that a nemesis will likely cross paths with them. Just keep those expectations managed. Make sure the player understands that circumstances may keep these possibilities from happening. The most major of which, of course, is that their character dies first. Now, this might sound a little too meta, and you'll think that it ruins the immersion for the player, but you'll find it does the exact opposite. It creates a lot of engagement with the character for the player. Most players really like the idea that they're partially writing their character's future, or at least got something put into the outline, even if it doesn't stick. After all, they don't know the details of how that thing will come to pass if it does. It's like watching Star Wars Episode 4 for the first time. And yes, I'm that old. You've probably already heard that the Death Star is going to blow up, but you're excited to find out how it's going to be blown up. That's part of the fun. Heck, that's part of the fun for whole story arcs and campaigns. You know you'll probably destroy the BB-EG, but it's the mystery of how you'll beat them that's really got you going. The next step in this, of course, is to repeat the process every time there's a big change for the character and every so many sessions of the game. You may have noticed that I've already discussed how to make backstories into future stories right in the follow-up actions before. Whenever you start planning ahead, especially with the player, some potential ways to advance a character's individual story, you are creating future story. Just remember, future stories may not come to pass. You have to always remember player agency and keeping the threat of death and the like, so as to keep the stakes high. And there you have it. You are now an expert on using backstories to create more player engagement. But wait, there's more. I have a bonus for you for watching the entire video. I have recently relearned rendering. Thank you, GM Philosophy Coffee Break. Rendering is a technique for adding depth to the descriptions of people, places, and things without increasing the exposition of description at the beginning of encounters. For example, the party walks into a tavern and you describe the tavern in general terms because the players already know what taverns look like and they've heard it all before and they can imagine one easily on their own and it would bore them probably. But when one of them orders a beer, you can say, the bartender, who you notice has a twinkle in his brown eyes and some crow's feet in the corners, practically slams the steel mug down onto the shining dark-stained bar and slides it over to you. Well, now you've added something to the tavern, a little depth. And you did it without having lengthened your initial description and without boring your players. What does this have to do with backstories? Well, let me tell you. You can tailor these descriptions for individual characters. For example, maybe the dwarf sees how much pride the bartender takes in keeping the bar beautiful. I mean, look at that shine on the bar top. The dwarf starts inspecting the handiwork from the well-shined brass footrest bar for the shorter folk to the lighter wooden bumpers on both sides to keep the drinks and food from falling off. He couldn't have made a better bar himself. The halfling, though, is entranced by the pretty halfling girl with the hazel eyes and chestnut hair in the booth just opposite the bar. That green floral print dress leaves little to the imagination up top, but she keeps looking directly at him in a nervous way, not in an attracted way. Something is up with her. She reminds him of his old flame. Her expression is just like his old flame's when she had to tell him that she lost his ring. Now the dwarf, with his red braided beard, and the halfling are noticing two completely different things and responding to those two completely different stimuli. While the woman with the chestnut hair is probably the plot-advancing thing to notice, the tavern is now no longer a generic tavern to the dwarf. It's now the tavern with the beautiful bar. Notice I also started rendering the dwarf with his beard, even though he's a PC in this story. The point being, though, is that what they're both seeing has something to do with their backgrounds. It turns out the dwarf is a carpenter when he's not adventuring, and the woman looks like the halfling's old lover. If you've liked this video, please hit like and subscribe and the bell. If you haven't already, go watch the first two videos in this series. By the way, I'm going to start doing videos not just here, but also on the GM Philosophers channel, linked below. In addition to the GM Philosopher, there are several other creators, such as myself, who are working on turning that channel into something bigger for GMs and DMs. So come on over, get some great tips on running your games and building your worlds, and whether I see you next time here or next time over there, may all your games be full of glory. Till next time.